I'm Rick Lewis with Phenon Hoop Report. On today's Coach's Corner, I have Coach Maurice Jones from Phillip. Welcome, Coach.
Hey, thanks for having me, Coach Lewis.
Well, Coach, you graduated from Sumter, South Carolina in 1996. Tell everybody a little bit about the town of Sumter and where it's actually located.
Sumter's located in the Midlands of the middle part of South Carolina. So I guess probably 45 miles outside of Columbia. So when people ask, where Sumter is, I kind of give that location point of Columbia to give them a gist of where Sumter is.
Yeah, and also, Sumter is Sumter, and most people want to spell it Sumpter. But, you must still have a lot of love for South Carolina because I noticed on your telephone you still have the area code 803.
There you go. Just being from South Carolina, it's a lot of pride. I guess I carry a lot of pride from being from South Carolina, and let alone just Sumter. But yeah, Sumter's where I'm born and bred, South Carolina. So it's kind of a sense of pride. That's why I keep the 803.
I totally understand. Now, Coach, you were a very good basketball player coming out of high school, and you had an opportunity to play Division II basketball at Anderson University. Talk about the transition from being a player at Sumter, a small rural area, and having the opportunity to play collegiately.
Just that whole transition from going from high school to college, and just like I try to tell, all the guys I've coached throughout the years, it's night and day, and you got to kind of reprogram yourself and kind of humble yourself a little bit, just kind of starting back over from ground zero. You're coming from a small town where everybody knows, what you can do, how good of a player you are. But then at the end of the day, once you go to that next level, you're dealing with guys 2, 3, 4 years older than you, and their bodies are more developed and they're just better athletes and better conditioning than you are at that time. So just getting to understand that whole process, which it is a tough process for any young kid to understand, especially, everybody comes from high school being the guy. But I handled it well. It was a lot of bumps and bruises along the way, but handled it pretty well and, end up having a decent college career.
I'm sure you, like most everybody else coming out of high school, you were a star at your local high school. You probably thought you were going to go to Anderson University, which was, you're probably thinking it's a D2 school, but I'm going to go in there and do the same thing at the high school level. I'm going to do the same thing at the collegiate level. That's not always the case, is it?
That's the biggest misconception, especially with Division II basketball. Just from the standpoint of, and like I know, the conference that we played in, which was the CVAC at the time. Now they moved to the SAC, but the likenesses of Queens, Lincoln Memorial, Barton, Lees McRae, Erskine, Limestone, teams like that, which Lincoln Memorial and Queens, they at this point, they kind of put out typically pros or guys who, were at Division I level at one point, and now they're going down to Division II. So the biggest misconception is Division II, it's a lower level of basketball, but it's a lot of instances where a lot of those guys are just as good, if not better, than a lot of guys you see playing on TV every during the week. So
I think the other misconception, Coach, with the Division II is the quality of play, but also the amount of enthusiasm. I mean, you're playing, like you said, schools like Lincoln Memorial and Queens University and those type of schools, and they pack the fans in. It's very intense, and it's a big rivalry. And, if you compare that to some of the lower tier Division I schools, you can watch a game on ESPNU and watch a lower tier D1, and you look at the arena and there's no one there. And with D2, a lot of these teams that you're playing day in, day out, if they were playing at the D1 lower tier level, they would be very successful.
Oh, exactly. Now, that's a great point. And like I know, going into the oven, when the oven before moving into the new arena, that was probably the most hostile environment I've ever been in my life. And I mean, just from arenas like that to, like you said, granted, gyms are a little smaller, so you're playing in front of maybe 1,500 or 1,000 people. But when I say they're literally on top of you every play and just kind of ragging you the whole time, I mean, it's a great Division II basketball is a great atmosphere in these conferences.
And Coach, how do you approach it today when you work with kids and you mentioned Division II to them, and they sort of like, "Nah, I want it's D1 or bust."
Right. That's the hardest thing, especially nowadays with social media and like just kids don't really get the true sense of what Division II basketball is,
Right.
because you can go right now to a open gym at Queens, or and that's what I try to tell my guys to do, like in the off season when they have open gyms and things like that, and allow kids to come in. Just go play with those guys for a little bit, and then come back and give me a report of what you think. But now, granted, that's extremely high level Division II, but everybody else, in conferences such as that one is not that far off. But kind of getting them to understand and see, and just throwing them in the fire. If you don't believe me, just go over there and take a look. But just get them to understand that and do that. I mean, it's kind of a struggle, but a lot of guys I've talked to that actually decide to go Division II route just kind of come back and say, Coach, yeah, you were right.
They get humbled very quickly, don't they?
Oh, yes. Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Now, Coach, when you graduated from Anderson University, you really knew exactly what you wanted to do. You wanted to get into coaching.
Right.
And immediately after you graduated in 2001, you took an assistant job at a school called Scott Sprint, and I would have to look this up, in Somerton, South Carolina.
Yes, sir. It's even, like I was telling you earlier, it's even more rural than Sumter. I mean, Highway 15 takes you straight down to about a 30-minute ride. Takes you right into Somerton, but with one flashing light, by the way. But just to be in that environment and understanding the sense of pride that a even smaller town like that has, and the level of athletes coming from a 1A school, just from the past few years. Even when I was there, they were coming off of back-to-back basketball state titles, and even this year, I think they played for the state championship game. But within the last 15, 20 years, they've been either in or have won a state championship a few times.
Well, what was it like when you first were named the JV coach? What went through your mind?
Initially, just nervousness. Same nervousness that I had when you play, but when that ball goes up, or when it's time to get on the sideline and kind of coach kids up, all that kind of went out of the window. But just because I like you said, I've always felt like I've been a coach. I played point guard. Me and my head college coaches have always had great relationships as far as X's and O's and off the court. So I kind of felt like I was groomed at an early age, prior to just kind of come in and, rally the troops and do what we're supposed to do.
Now, after you spent time in Somerton, South Carolina, and you were an assistant coach, you had an opportunity to move to the big city. Now, you got a job at South Mech, and you became the JV head coach. So what was it like now for you? You're very young. You're going from an assistant coach. Now even though it's a JV position, you're still a head coach.
Right. Just moving to that position was a little more intimidating, just from the simple fact of coming from a 1A conference, 1A basketball. And like you said, yes, going to pretty much what people see as the mecca of Southern basketball, so to speak, in Charlotte, North Carolina. So going into that, seeing, well, first of all, the size of the JV kids, the size of the varsity kids, how those guys, how much harder they compete, and the access they have to, certain things, and the skill level, it was a little different. But again, settled into that role and really had good tutelage and leadership from a lot of different avenues.
So much of being a high school coach, there's a tremendous journey that you go through, because for a lot of young people, they don't understand that it's a process. You got to take baby steps along the way. I mean, and you have to be very fluid in as far as moving from one position to another. And you told me that you went from at South Mech, then you got positions over at Gaston Day and Butler High School. You were the JV head coach and assistant coach to the varsity level. So you were basically going through the process. But Then in 2007, you had an opportunity to get into the collegiate level. You were the director of basketball operations. What was it like going from high school now going to college?
That journey was a little different, a little weird. Being 2 years at South with Coach Kerry Clark, and going over with Kurt Wessler over at Butler for those 2 years. I remember distinctly going into it was right before school started. We were actually at a professional development meeting downtown CMS, and my college coach just called me out of the blue, and we talked periodically, here and there, but he just called me out of the blue. He was actually the associate head coach down at the Citadel. So he called and asked me would I be interested. And just, from that standpoint, having the opportunity or, just to go down to the Division I level and just kind of see what it's all about and kind of gain that experience and cut my teeth at that level a little bit. Being young at that time, I just kind of, I said, why not? So after that whole process took place, went down to the Citadel in the 2007-2008 season, and learned the tremendous amount of just knowledge about basketball, about life, everything under the sun, on and off the court. I learned, and that was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had.
And as a director of basketball operations, you just do a little bit of everything, and people don't understand that. I mean, you book flights, you book hotels. You are just a jack of all trades. You get to know how the basketball program runs from the ground up.
Right. Going into that situation, they gave me the heads up, and I kind of understood. But having my former head coach on that staff and kind of helping me guide me through certain things. But like you said, from day one, you helping with scheduling, you're helping with film exchange, you're helping with film breakdown, you're making sure the guys are going to class, you're making sure they're picking up behind themselves in the locker room, you're talking to the managers, the secretaries, the janitors. So from every aspect of anybody who touches a basketball program, the director of basketball operations has to know and has to have a good relationship with if they want to be successful in that role.
Now, being a basketball player at the high school and the collegiate level at Anderson, and then you've already had Trex coaching at the high school level, going to Citadel as a director of basketball operations, you're doing everything else but getting on the floor and coaching. So that had to be pretty difficult.
Initially it was, and even at times, when I'm at practice, I'm trying to keep myself on the sidelines. I would always look up in the top part of the Raptors at McAllister Fieldhouse and see our compliance officer up there. So I would make sure I stayed behind that line and stayed in my role. But just being around being around that whole deal and understanding what I was in and what I was there to do from a personal standpoint and a professional standpoint. Just having those guys like Ed Conroy, who's the associate head in Minnesota right now, and my former head coach, and actually our athletic director at the time was Les Robinson, who was the head coach at NC State, and also having Bobby Crimmins right next door, going over and exchanging film with those guys and sitting and talking and just exchanging stories or listening to stories that they would tell. That experience again was extremely invaluable.
You mentioned Ed Conroy. I just spoke to him yesterday. He's at the University of Minnesota. They take our scouting service with Feed on Hoop Report.
Okay.
Now, Coach, again, going back and just talking about your journey, you were an assistant JV coach and you were a head coach at a JV level, and then you're going to be a DOBO. But in 2010, now it's all starting to come together for you. You become the head coach at the varsity level, and you started out at was it West Mac?
It was as a head coach. It was at West Mac. Head coach at Queens Grant. I'm sorry.
You had Queens Grant, and then you had West Mac. So now you're getting your opportunity to coach at the varsity level. Talk about that process.
Again, like you said, I was kind of back and forth a while, learning from a lot of people, and actually I felt like I was getting closer and closer to becoming a head coach in Charlotte. And then just understanding, where I was at the time, but I also felt that I was getting extremely close, just from the contacts I've gained throughout those experiences and just the lessons I've learned. And I began to interview better, began to meet a lot more people. My contact log became extremely long. The players I've coached and the successes they've had, that whole experience is kind of like you said was a process.
Well, and people don't understand how difficult it is. I mean, number one, it's hard to get a job as a high school basketball coach anywhere because you got so many coaches that's been around and they have tenure. They've been there 15, 20 plus years at one school. So getting a high school coaching job is not easy. And what a lot of people don't understand is how difficult it is to get where you want to be. And you got to take these steps along the way. Now, in 2012, you became the head coach at Phillip O'Berry. So you spent the last 8 years at Phillip O'Berry. Now, for the people out there, you have to be playing in one of the toughest, most difficult conferences in the entire state of North Carolina. You're going up against Olympic, who's had a powerhouse program for over a decade. Now they got Barrington Terry over there. And then, on this night, I got to play, Mike Kraft at Audrey Kell. And then now you're looking at, LJ Johnson is building a really good program over at Harding. And you have the new coach at South Meck and Gary Hall. So to me, you're playing in one of the toughest conferences in the state, and you're trying to build a program at Phillip O'Berry. And that's not always been an easy task to do.
No, it wasn't. But coming in, having the experiences, I was a lot more calmer coming into that situation. Now, granted, when my first year at Phillip O'Berry, that the same conference, which was actually a split 3A, 4A. So at that time, Catholic was in the conference with Mike King. So you're talking about Mike King, Mike Kraft. At the time, it was Walt Aikens at Harding and Ty Bumgarner at Olympic. So it just from day one stepping into that conference, I knew, everything had to be sharp, or less Phillip O'Berry was going to get embarrassed night in and night out. But you just understanding what my role was and what my job was to get my troops ready to be ready to go to war night in and night out. I took a lot of pride in it, and some days we did take some losses, but we did have a few pretty good wins too. So.
Now, Coach, you've been around, the game for a while now, and you've had good experience as a assistant at the JV, head coach at the JV. Now you're a head coach. Name some of the coaches that's had an impact on your coaching philosophy.
My biggest influence is Doug Novak, who's my former head coach at Anderson, but he's the head coach up at Bethel University up in Minnesota right now. Between him, Kerry Clark, Kurt Wessler. I don't want to leave anybody out, but I'm just naming a few names. Sean Wiseman, Mike Kraft, who I talk to regularly, Ty Bumgarner, who I still talk to regularly, Myron Lowry, we talk once or twice a month. Just all these guys, I just kind of pick their brains ever so often whenever I can and bounce things off of them and vice versa. And also just I've understood just kind of being in this game, you can't just focus on one type of person to gain experiences from. But one of my former department heads at the time, Hal Bagwell, who's the head coach at Audrey Kell, one of the most winningest baseball coaches in the state, was a mentor to me. But I kind of take bits and pieces from all of those guys, all those experiences, things I've seen them do throughout the years, and just kind of, pick and choose certain things I like to implement into what I do with my guys and what I do off the court with the guys, and just kind of let it go from there.
You mentioned that you also talked to Ty Bumgarner, you also talked to Mike Kraft, and you also talked to Myron Lowry. Those are guys that you've coached against. Talk about the coaching fraternity, that you have that relationship, that you go against them on a Tuesday or Friday night, but you still have the respect factor that you can pick their brains on how to become a better coach.
And don't get me wrong. Now we after I've lost to Ty, or I've lost to Myron. It's always initially you kind of got that competitive edge. I might talk to you later on, or I might talk to you next week. But again, you kind of hit the nail on the head with respect. Because I mean, I think a lot of guys, when you see guys doing things the right way, on and off the court, the kids playing the right way, and they just kind of walk a certain way. Certain guys are attracted to certain minds think alike. I'm not necessarily a great mind, but certain minds think alike. And I think once you gain that respect from your peers, it's a no-brainer to kind of call them and say, hey, what do you think about this offense? Or hey, I had this kid do this, or hey, can you help me out and make a few calls? And I'm trying to get this kid in school. But just having that rapport with those guys kind of helps. I guess I would use the old saying, like iron sharpens iron. And if you kind of keep that mentality, you can be real successful and have a long career just like those guys have had.
Well, a lot of people may not think that, you guys even speak to each other. They think that there's a rivalry on the basketball court and it doesn't carry over. But that's the beautiful thing about it is like you guys can be competitors on the court on a Tuesday or Friday night, but you can still be friends off the court. And I like the idea that you guys can, call each other and basically bounce ideas off on how to become a better coach. That really there speaks a lot of volume.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I think for certain professions to grow and certain professions to just get better, that has to be done. Like if we think that we can't speak, or we can't bounce certain ideas off one another, I think the whole profession of especially high school coaching would become extremely stagnant, and we couldn't help any other young guys like we were at one point. We couldn't help them along if we didn't actually try to share knowledge and talk and do certain things to kind of help the profession as a whole out.
Coach, name some players that you've coached against and also coached with that's gone on to be collegiate players.
Oh, it's just a lot to name without leaving the names out from top to bottom. I mean, Brandis Riley Ross, Gabe Blair, Dante Clark, Marcus Johnson, Che Bob.
And these are all players you've coached, correct?
Yes. Casmon Hayes, Jamarius Burton. I mean, the list goes on and on, but just being around athletes at that level, it always keeps you, wanting to get better as a coach. Because at the end of the day, granted, they're all these guys I've named are extremely talented basketball players, but without having some sort of tutelage and leadership and showing them how to do things the right way, I guess at the end of the day, that's our main goal.
I was going to say probably one of the biggest rewards as being a coach is when you coach these young men in high school, when you see them have the opportunity to get that collegiate scholarship, that has to be the most rewarding part of it all.
Oh, it is. It is. Just to see the look on their faces when they either sign that letter or they for me, it's just the texts or the calls. Like right now, even though we're in this pandemic, I probably got 20 texts from guys trying to find somewhere to work out. And these are guys, back home for the summer, back home from overseas, and just trying to figure out, where to go. But to me, that's the most gratifying thing about the whole deal is they still, reach out and they still look to, look for guidance in a certain way. But just having them make to the next level, see that their hard work has finally paid off. I mean, that's kind of that's what we're in the game for. That's our job.
A lot of people just don't understand, like, they just think if you coach an X's and O's, you're just coaching them during the basketball season. That's far from the truth.
Yeah.
You're developing relationships that are going to last a lifetime, and you make a huge impression on all the players that you coach. Let me ask you this. If you were to step away from the game tomorrow, how would you want to be remembered by your players?
Ooh, that's a tough one. For me, it's just that to be remembered as somebody who always tried to get them to do things the right way, on and off the court. And the thing about it is, I'm always looked at now as the grumpy old man, just because I'm always on them, probably more so about things off the court. So just like you were saying, I mean, just keeping them in line, doing things they're supposed to do, and getting them to understand that everything we do on the court, everything we talk about on the court is synonymous with life. I'm a huge proponent. I mean, huge guy who thinks that, everything you do on the court, everything you teach them, it does carry over, to everything you do in life. As far as like being on the court on time or before practice, it does translate to getting up and getting to work on time. So just getting those guys to understand that and see that, and when they actually do see it and that light bulb does come on, I think most of them probably would say getting me to do the right things off the court.
Well, for me, like, and I've said this many, many times before, is like when I was in high school, and that was many, many decades ago. I'm 63, so, but I still remember my high school coach. That's something for most people to understand. When you go through the process and you're playing high school basketball, you never forget your high school coach.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Just understanding that exact same concept. Who Byron Kennedy was my high school coach, and just understanding like the importance of the fine line you walk, because somebody is always watching, and just making sure you're doing the right things, for the program, and doing the right things by them. I mean, ultimately, they're always going to remember who you are.
Coach, I mentioned earlier that you're in a very difficult conference. What's the biggest challenges you face coaching at Phillip O'Berry?
The biggest challenge, I believe, and I hadn't had many, just because I've always had, really good administration and really good guys coming through. But our biggest thing is, because we don't, Phillip O'Berry is a magnet school. So we don't have a home school. So kids from all over Charlotte, come to Phillip O'Berry. And I guess our biggest thing is, we're almost looked at sometimes as a commuter school.
Right.
And a lot of times that neighborhood camaraderie or that neighborhood feel isn't there all the time. But administration and between myself and administration and the athletic directors have kind of tried to, build a culture where it's a family-like culture, it's a family-like atmosphere, because you got to think during games, if some of our kids leave, kids who come to watch the game, if they leave, they're going all the way to South Charlotte or all the way up to North Charlotte or all the way to East Charlotte. They may not make it back to the game versus, somebody who, is at advanced and they're just living in the university area. They can, run home real quick and come back. But I guess for us, that's probably been the biggest challenge, but we've done a good job of kind of, bridging that gap and, building that family atmosphere and that family culture.
Coach, the one thing that you've been able to do at Phillip O'Berry is set the culture. And I know a lot of people just don't understand what's the definition of a successful coach. And to me, a successful coach is coaching life skills,
There you go.
preparing your players, for the game of life, and also doing things the right way. And those are the things that you ingrain in your players at Phillip O'Berry. And, I know it's difficult, not everybody can be in a situation where they're coaching at a, Audrey Kell or Advance or a North Mech. And that has nothing to do with how good someone is as a coach. And just speaking with you, Coach, the values that you have, the culture you're trying to ingrain at Phillip O'Berry, and like you said, it's a commuter type school. But the things that you're trying to leave behind is what coaching is all about. And I just want to say thank you for coming on today on Phenon's Coach's Corner and sharing your story, because a lot of people just don't understand how difficult the journey is to get where you are today.
I agree. I appreciate it, and I thank you. And I guess for this platform, to be out about, and I've watched other interviews, other coaches. Like I love the platform that you're giving for us to kind of share our stories and share our journeys. And I guess we should be tipping our hat to you just for having this platform for us.
Well, thank you so much, Coach, and good luck to you this season.
We need it. We need it, Coach. We need it.
And we hope to have you at some of our high school jamborees, and let us know when you have open gym. We'll be glad to come by and check you guys out in open gym. I know you graduated a lot of seniors from last year's team, so it's going to be another rebuilding year. And like I said earlier, you don't have the luxury of being a commuter school that has that basically that filter program that comes in through the middle school and the JV to the varsity level. So your job is a little bit more difficult than I think a lot of the other coaches in the area.
Oh, yes, yeah, yeah, it is. I wish we had a middle school right down the street where I could see those guys coming. But again, I mean, we've done a good job of getting our name out there and our culture out there, and just kind of, letting people see what we do and what we have to offer academically and athletically with Phillip O'Berry. But again, I appreciate it, Coach. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Coach.